Hello and welcome to day 2 of the Greenlight Guru True Quality Virtual Summit, the 3-day event designed to provide actionable takeaways you can implement in your own company to innovate faster, stay ahead of regulatory changes, and use quality as a strategic asset to grow your device business. Track 2 today is focused on how to advance the success of your devices on the market. This session specifically is titled How to Implement and Maintain an Audit-Ready QMS Leveraging Technology. My name is Nick Tittman. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Greenlight Guru, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We've got a really special session scheduled for you today. I know our speaker, Jon Speer, is really looking forward to covering the benefits of a modern, purpose-built QMS software that ensures compliance with the latest regulations and frees up your engineers' time, reduce risks, and helps you pass audits with flying colors. But before we dive too deep into today's presentation and introduce our speaker and our company, Greenlight Guru, I'm going to touch on a few items real quick. First, the session is going to run for about 45 minutes in total and will include a Q&A session at the end where Jon has been kind enough to answer all of your questions for you. So I encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation as they come up in the box on the right-hand slide, and we'll get to as many of them as time permits. And yes, the session is being recorded. You'll be sent the recording after the session, and the slides are available on your screen today. You can download them right from the app. Once this session wraps up, there's a 10-minute break before the next session begins. If you're interested in learning more about economic operators under the new EU MDR, you'll want to be sure to register for the next session and use your unique link to tune in. I'd also like to share a few words about Greenlight Guru and why we put on this free virtual summit. If you've been on one of our training sessions before, then you know we put these on because improving the quality of life is our mission here at Greenlight Guru. Likely a similar mission to many of yours at today's summit. Anything we can do as an organization that helps device makers bring safer, life-changing devices to market quicker with less risk aligns with that mission. We're constantly looking for ways to fulfill that mission, whether that's through hosting free events and training sessions like this, through partnering with world-class medical device consultancies, or through our award-winning QMS software. If you'd like to learn more about why medical device companies from across the globe are moving away from paper-based and general-purpose quality management systems and adopting our purpose-built medical device quality management software platform, then I encourage you to head on over to www.greenlight.guru after today's presentation and schedule your free personalized demo. All right. Now on to the bulk of today's presentation. Let me give a proper introduction to our presenter here today, Mr. Jon Speer. Jon Speer is the founder and VP of QA/RA here at Greenlight Guru. He has over 20 years of experience in the medical device industry. He's worked at Fortune 500s, worked with small startups. His expertise ranges from project management, design controls, quality management, implementation, really everything in the medical device industry related to bringing a new device to market and keeping it there. Jon has done it. You might have seen him, some of his content contributed in many industry publications like Quality Digest, MedTech Intelligence, Med Device Online, and many more. He is also host to the most listened to podcast in the medical device industry, the Global Medical Device Podcast. So without further ado, let's dive into today's content. Jon, take it away.
Thanks, Nick, and welcome everybody to day 2. Hopefully some of you had a chance to see the presentation that I did yesterday morning. If you, I don't know if you picked up on it, but the way Greenlight software is designed is we have Go and Grow, and yesterday's session was largely about the Go functionality, the pre-market workflows that are important from a quality management system. We'll touch on a little bit of that today. But the focus of today will be primarily on the post-market needs of a quality management system as well. And so I'm just going to dive right into it. And a lot of materials to cover. And as Nick said, fire away with your questions. We'll make sure we save some time to handle those here in a few moments. But I think it's really interesting to think about the world that we're in right now when it comes to quality. You know, it's one of those. It's one of those tricky words because sometimes I hear or perceive when I talk to a lot of companies that the term quality has a lot of negative connotations and a lot of baggage and these sorts of things. But, you know, truly, this is what this is all about. This is why we are in the medical device industry is to improve the quality of life. So it needs to become, we need to shed all that negative baggage that this term has and put it more at the center of the universe at everything we do. You don't just have to be a part of the quality functional group within your organization. I know it sounds cliche, but everybody has responsibility for quality, whether it's designing something or receiving materials from suppliers, or routing documents for review and approval. Everything we do, the quality needs to be front and center. So I think it's really important. But you can see, Greenlight ran a survey of the industry recently, and the results were pretty staggering, quite frankly, and a lot more details that we can share with you if you'd like to see a copy of that report. So just reach out to us and we'll get that to you. But it's pretty clear that when companies do not invest in quality, that it's not really a very good culture to be a part of. So I think that's really a key thing to think about. And part of that negative connotation, the negative baggage that the term quality seems to carry, unfortunately, in the industry today. Same thing is often can be said for quality system. A lot of people look at this as something they have to do, and I hope that today there's something that I'm going to share with you to flip a switch or to change your perspective, and to realize that a quality management system is an awesome opportunity for us to operate our businesses in a way that's efficient, but at the end leads to safer, more effective medical devices. So I have a few goals that I want to run through with you today. I want to talk about this acronym SMART, S-M-A-R-T, and what it means with respect to your quality management system. And regardless if you're a startup or an established company, I think there are some really valuable insights and information that I'll share with you today, just to get you thinking about your quality management system a little bit differently. I want to talk about how this can help you accelerate product development. And I touched a little bit on this yesterday as well, but the bigger picture is, once you go to market, is you have this responsibility for managing that product and all of your products throughout the entire product life cycle. So kind of the adage that you might be familiar with is cradle to grave. There's an expectation that you're managing everything about those products from inception and until obsolescence. And then the other goal is I want, again, to offer at least one thing for you and your teams to think about, shifting from a compliance mind to more of a true quality mindset. And we'll dive right in. Part of if the past few years have been crazy. I mean, I've been in this industry for 22 years, and the things that have happened in the past few years, any one of these items all by themselves is pretty significant. But the fact that almost all of these things have been happening in parallel with one another is pretty significant. But ISO 1345, yeah, we know that changed a few years ago. I think the big gotcha or aha or challenge that was introduced in that standard is this whole idea of risk-based quality management system. And what does it mean? I mean, and even 4 years later, I think we're still trying to figure out what that means in some respects. Yeah, EU MDR, that's, well, it was supposed to be in effect by now, but obviously world circumstances have delayed that introduction. But last I checked, even before the pandemic, the world was very behind with respect to implementing EU MDR. So still have a lot of work to do. FDA continues to restructure and reorganize. They recently introduced this notion of a super office with the focus on device safety and effectiveness. And then a lot more people, regulatory bodies, are intrigued by this medical device single audit program. So much so that, again, this is older news, but if you're introducing a product into Canada, you're probably going to have to become 1345 certified and do so in an MD-SAP audit as well. So a lot of changes that continue to happen. And I think this is a theme that we should expect as an industry to continue. on a go-forward basis, there will be changes. And I assure you that our finger is on the pulse at Greenlight Guru. Our medical device QMS software is always being evolved in a way that keeps you ahead of the curve, so to speak. And we'll talk more about this throughout the session today, but compliance is important. I don't want that to be lost. Greenlight provides the guardrails so that you can stay compliant, so that you can align with the medical device criterion and regulations. We are medical device specific, and so our workflows are informed by all the regulations that are important to you and your companies. But let's give a little bit of an overview. And if you're on the session yesterday, this might be repeat information, so bear with me for a moment. But if you're a pre-market company, I talk a lot about bootstrapping your quality management system. So focus on the things that are important to where you are as a company. But this idea can continue to evolve as your company grows and as you get to market and post-market. I'm a keep things lean and mean from a quality system perspective, and that kind of leads into the next step. Or a cornerstone of the philosophy: keep your quality management system simple. I see it all the time. I shared a story yesterday about a startup that made life complicated for them with respect to their quality management system, but they're not alone. Even large established companies, sometimes they create a lot of procedures and create a lot of confusion and create a lot of unnecessary burden within their day-to-day lives as medical device professionals. So, do yourself a favor, evaluate your quality system, see if there might be some areas where you can make it lean and more efficient. And in doing so, I suspect you'll find that people will be more embracing your quality system, more so if it's a little bit more simple to follow, and if they can connect the dots to the things that they're doing within your quality management system in their day-to-day job, and they can connect that and attribute value to that. So I really challenge all of us to make sure our quality systems can be as simple as they possibly can. And then third cornerstone is really about right sizing. So think of your quality management system as a living entity, if you will. And as your company evolves, so should your quality management system. Your quality management system should describe how you do business and all the documentation and records that are necessary throughout all the different things that you're doing, especially as it relates to total product lifecycle and the safety and efficacy of your medical devices. All right, so I talked about risk-based QMS and this new notion that was formally introduced in the 1345 2016. I thought I would elaborate a little bit on that. So that 1345 standard, it referred to 14971. Again, 14971 is product risk management based for the medical device industry. But within that 14971 standard, there's a pretty good description of a process about risk planning, evaluation, analysis, assessment, control, and so on and so forth. And I believe what the folks who drafted or defined the 1345 standard were trying to communicate is 14971 has a good process that describes a risk management approach, and that sort of process should be applied to throughout everything we do within our businesses. So whether that's suppliers, I should use a risk-based approach in assessing my suppliers. I should identify, I should put together a plan. I should identify what those suppliers are providing. I should determine the risk or the criticality of those products and services, and then I should monitor and put controls in place to make sure that I know that I'm going to continue to get good, high quality products and services from the suppliers. That's an example. But if I get like feedback from the use of my product, what do I do about it? If it's a complaint, of course you need to do a thorough and proper investigation, and if God forbid, but if there was some sort of adverse event that was involved, I have to go through that process as well, notifying the applicable regulatory bodies and that sort of thing. But a lot of the feedback that we get on our products, it's not at that level, to be quite frank. So what do you do about it? Well, if you implement a risk-based approach to that customer feedback and complaint handling process, that can help streamline some of the workflows for you. And this, I could go on and on with every single quality management system example and process and so on. But the key thing here is figure out what risk-based is with respect to that individual process. And encourage you all to ask a few questions about this if maybe we can dive into some details and some more specific areas of concern that you all have later on in today's session. I think another thing that's really, really important is being audit ready. And I know this, sometimes talking about audits and FDA inspections sounds like a fear-based mentality. It's not intended to be, but I've worked at companies and I've talked to companies that when they know they're having an audit or an FDA inspection, they suddenly start to behave differently. You know, I recall many times in my past where we got notification of FDA is coming, or you know, the ISO audit is next week, or whatever the case may be, and then there was like this mad dash and this scramble to try to, you know, find all the CAPA records and figure out what's going on there, and everybody was tasked with making updates and you know, making sure all the change orders were getting signed, and all these sorts of things, which, you know, my question was always, why don't we do this on a routine, everyday basis? Shouldn't a quality system be a quality system, and it shouldn't matter who's going to be evaluating that? And the answer is yes. You shouldn't change your behavior just because you know you have an ISO audit or an FDA inspection. This should be business as usual. It just so happens you have a couple of visitors those days. But it's really hard, and a lot of tools and a lot of approaches that people take when implementing a quality system to keep it audit ready at all times. This is one of the things that we've focused on with Greenlight Guru, is your system, your quality management system is always in a state of audit readiness. And have plenty of stories from our customers that said, you know, their prep time went down significantly by weeks in some cases, and the audit process was smoother. We even had one customer that was having an ISO certification audit, and it went so smooth that that last day was they didn't need it, and so you know, they chit-chatted with the auditor and those sorts of things. But you know, this is an opportunity for you all to gain some efficiency and be audit ready at all times. Cost of poor quality. I mean, there's some really good content out there on this particular topic. I'll speak in some, you know, I guess some hypothetical examples, but you know, if you have a device, I know my beginning of my career, my focus was, or my charge was really in the product development domain, so to speak. And there was always this mad dash or this desire to hurry up and get the product launched. And it can be tempting when you're in that environment to say, you know, well, we'll get to that later. And sometimes you may leave off or address a feature or an attribute of that product, and you may table that and say, well, we'll do that on the next revision or iteration or whatever the case may be. And there's all kinds of scenarios. That's just one. But what happens when you launch a product and you start getting some feedback, and that feedback's not good? What does that do to your business? Or what happens if you're going through the manufacturing process and you start generating a lot of manufacturing nonconformances? You know, maybe you didn't spend the time that was needed in order to define a manufacturing process that can allow you to build at scale. But now you have all these nonconformances, or now you have all this customer feedback and these complaints. What do you have to do? I mean, that cost, the internal cost, now you're pulling resources to focus on those complaint investigations. Now you're pulling resources to focus on figuring out what to do with all these manufacturing nonconformances. And the list can go on, but the costs are significant for a business when quality is not the center of the universe. And so I really challenge you all to think about what can you do to reduce the cost of poor quality. You'll hear me say this every podcast probably, and certainly every webinar that I've ever been on. This is how I'm wired. This is to my core. I'm about improving the quality of life. And if we're not focused on the right things in our business, we can have poor quality. And in the end, unfortunately, patients' lives are going to be impacted by that. So need to bring this more back into the center of the universe. So got a few more minutes today. I'm going to fire through this SMART methodology. And again, there are handouts that you can consume at your heart's desire. But SMART, basically what we created was this acronym: scope, make, approve, release, track. So let's talk a little bit about the scope phase. And this will dovetail with some of the things that I went through yesterday with the pre-market quality system needs. But scope is all about understanding how your device is classified, what your quality and regulatory plans are, what your project scope. So this is really a more of a planning type of exercise more than anything else. So that's a key thing to focus on. When we get into the make part of this process or this methodology, you start to look at design and development, risk management, product risk management, document management, supplier management. These are foundational to any quality system, foundational to any company that's just starting on this journey as well. So spend the appropriate amount of time defining your quality management system procedures around these areas. And again, if you need help with that, I've done this many times before. The Greenlight platform is designed specifically to accommodate this methodology. We have templates and procedures and so on that have been battle tested in hundreds and hundreds of audits and inspections. So we can help you out if you need a little bit of guidance on that. And then as you start to, I got a question yesterday on this session that I did about when, should I only focus on design control, risk, doc management, supplier management when I'm pre-market? And there's an asterisk here. There are some times where the answer is not yes, but my response was yes, that's where your focus is. And then when you start to get into the point where you're preparing a regulatory submission, chances are more of these other things start to come into play. Again, this is a generality. This is not a prescriptive comment, but generally speaking, a lot of products, once you submit that 510K or what have you in the US, then the idea is like, okay, now I have some time to start to build these other parts and pieces of a quality management system. It's a little more complicated outside the US, like in the EU when you're dealing with tech files and things of that nature, but this methodology still applies because you shouldn't, if you don't know if this thing is going to be a thing and you haven't gone through enough verification and validation during the design and development process, focusing on all of these other processes and procedures might not be the best use of your time. But there will be a point where you're going to start to transition and realize, okay, now we want to move toward this next stage of things from a quality management system. And so this starts to pull in training, change management, non-conforming material, because now you're starting probably to do some level of manufacturing, and all the things that go along with that, labeling, packaging, all the inspections, incoming, receiving, in process, final, and now your quality system is going to start to accelerate in a big way at this particular stage of the process. And then the release side of things, we really start to get into crossing the T's and dotting the I's, so to speak. But this is making sure you have everything finalized because at this release stage, you're preparing everything that you need to do to go to market. So you need to make sure all your processes are validated, any software solutions, you've addressed the validation there. Of course, any equipment needs to be installed correctly and calibrated and all these sorts of things. You need to make sure you have systems in place to handle customer feedback and complaints and adverse events, because once you go to market, that is not the time to then figure out how you're going to handle the feedback, because you could get feedback the next day. So make sure you have these systems in place. Now, I'll pause for a moment, because a really key point that I want to emphasize here is, although you're trying to define perfect processes and perfect procedures for all of these particular areas, I want to advise you to not strive for perfection. And some quality people are probably going to roll their eyes when I say this. I want you to strive for something that's the best of your ability and knowledge at that point in time as good enough. But here's where my advice I think makes a lot of sense, because your quality management system is a living thing. It's not like you're just going to define it, set it, implement it, and never come back to it. If you do that, that's really, you're missing the essence of what a quality management system is. But you're going to define something. Of course, you want to make sure that it complies and meets all the appropriate regulations that you're dealing with. But as you start to get experience with this procedure, you may find some opportunities for improvement. You may find some areas where you can iterate and improve that process and streamline it further, or maybe you found that you needed to add a few things, or maybe you needed to add a work instruction so that the people who are following these particular processes know what to do. Perfection is an illusion, especially when it comes to your quality management system. However, build in the feedback loops and the control mechanisms within your company so that you can, on a frequent basis, evaluate the effectiveness of all of these different processes and procedures. And then the last part of the SMART methodology is this track phase. So once you go to market, there are parts of your quality management system that are intended to help you with monitoring the effectiveness of your processes, but also monitoring the effectiveness of your products and taking the necessary actions, hopefully being proactive. But there are some times where you have to react to situations that you could not predict. And this is really the essence, is like this total life cycle process from a quality management system perspective. So a medical device quality management system, I mean, it's not like you're just going to put a bunch of procedures in place and then it goes on autopilot. Sometimes I get asked, "Hey, John, I'm looking for the autopilot quality system." And when I have those conversations, I'm like, yeah, maybe this isn't for you, because we're looking to partner and work with companies who embrace true quality or have an interest in embracing true quality as part of their culture. But it takes a balance. People, processes, and technology, these all have to be in sync with one another, because they all play a part with respect to a medical device quality management system. Audit-Ready, I talked about it before. But making sure that your systems are designed in a way and allow the updates to the different forms and records that you may have, or activities that you may have, so that it's always audit ready. That's so key. I think I hit that pretty hard earlier in today's presentation, but just thought it was worth mentioning again. Yeah, and we all know this. I'm sure many of you participating in today's session have probably heard this many times before, but it's true. If it's not documented, there's no record that it actually happened. So make sure you're doing your proper due diligence and documenting things appropriately. There are a lot of options that you have, frankly, when we get into quality management system, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the options, and then there's some ancillary supporting materials in this handout and this slide deck that can give you a lot more depth and detail about each of these areas. But it surprises me, even in 2020, that the predominant approach that people use is a paper-based approach. I'm just going to tell you, it doesn't scale very well, and we've learned during especially this pandemic period, a lot of companies are working remote, and I guess how in the world can a paper-based system work in that environment? And I know you're going to say, John, I'm not paper-based. I got a server. I've got SharePoint. I've got a folder tree. Yeah, I mean, it may not be physical paper, but that's still paper-like in its structure. Basically, it's replicating the literal file cabinet and doing so in a folder tree structure. It's fraught with challenges and issues. I mean, just think about if you're in that scenario, what is your process like to get review and approval, like signatures on documents? What is that like? I mean, I've heard stories where people send emails to all the people they need to sign, all the people who need to sign, then print it out, and they literally sign it, and they scan it back in, and they each email that back to the doc control person, and that poor doc control person has to put it all together. You know, sometimes people do try to have electronic signatures on different documents, but there's still this challenge, version control, and which folder has the right information, and what happens if somebody, you know, has a different folder over here, and that sort of thing. So lots of challenges that are fraught with paper and digital paper-like systems. General purpose tools and legacy quality management software. I mean, it is an upgrade for sure from a paper-based system. Some of the challenges that I experienced and what led me to start Greenlight Guru is they didn't understand med device, and there was a high amount of configuration and customization that was required by me, the user, in order to even get these tools to a point where I can use them. You know, and I didn't want to spend 6 to 9 months of my time doing this non-value add activity to try to configure and customize and validate those tools. So, you know, my experience pre-Greenlight, when I looked at these options, I'm like, no, paper's easier. And frankly, it might be when compared to general purpose tools and legacy QMS. And this is what drove us and motivated us from a Greenlight perspective, is really about enabling ease of use, frankly. Quality system shouldn't be an obstacle or an impediment to getting things done. It should support you getting things done. It should sort of run in the background and align with the jobs of all of you as medical device professionals. Yes, there are things that need to be documented. Yes, there are activities that need to be done, but it should flow very seamlessly. And that's what we've built within the Greenlight Guru Go and Grow side of things, and a fully connected ecosystem with respect to your quality management system related activities, whether it be design and development, or handling a complaint, managing documents and changes, dealing with CAPAs. All of these things are in the Greenlight Guru workflow, and they're all synced together. Again, I'm not going to go through these next couple of slides, a lot of details there, but you can consume these on your own time. Just some ancillary information. You know, kind of wrapping things up here in the next couple of minutes. It is interesting though that there's still a high preponderance of companies that use paper or non-purpose-built paper or digital type of tools, and there's still a lot of issues from an FDA perspective. I don't. You know, maybe this is too provocative, but is there a coincidence that companies are struggling to get through audits and inspections, and the industry is still predominantly on paper? I don't know. Seems curious to me for sure. So again, I talked about this. You know, the Greenlight system connects your entire quality management ecosystem all under one system of record. It's all connected. So when you go through design and development, you launch the product, and now you have feedback on that product. You can connect it to that actual device that you developed and keep your design history file living throughout the entire product lifecycle, as well as your risk management file, and have all of these records connected appropriately. This chart is from LNS research. It's a few years old, but it's still applicable. And if you think, you know, I guess I would challenge each of you to think about where you are on this quality maturity model. And this maturity methodology is actually something that's been happening quite a bit with FDA. Actually, FDA has this case for quality initiative, and they use a CMMI approach with respect to maturity of a business perspective. But this scale, if you will, applies even in those scenarios. I suspect all of you want to be market leaders. So, you know, but you're probably curious, what does that mean? What do I have to do to be a market leader? And we're trying to enable our customers to be market leaders because we've built this purpose-built medical device quality management system. And we have gurus, folks with medical device industry experience that inform the product, but that work side by side with all of our customers. So, you know, we're seeing some really great of trends with our customer base. You know, getting through audits easier, getting through clearances, device clearances easier. Really trying to accelerate their path to go to market and to, you know, really improve that quality of life. So, but do yourself a favor and assess where you are and figure out what you need to do to move up this ladder, so to speak. So as I've talked about, you know, Greenlight software is go and grow. We have medical device quality system experts on staff as well, our gurus as well. Within Greenlight, all of these workflows, CAPAs, change, complaint, audit, nonconformance. It is the medical device quality management system. It's built and aligns with all the regulations, 820, 1345, Part 11, 14971, and so on and so forth. And my number one job at Greenlight is to make sure that the system that we provide to our customers continues to align and stay up to speed with the latest, greatest thinking from a regulatory perspective. So we got you covered from that perspective. These are fantastic people. I hope some of you participating today have had a chance to work with or chat with one or more of these folks, but these people care. They care so much. And I hope it's okay with you all, but we live a little bit vicariously with our the relationships that we have with our customers, because we're trying to facilitate and help our customers get life-saving, life-changing products to market, or to address any, you know, sort of challenges, or whatever the case may be. All the challenges that medical device companies are faced, these gurus, they've got your back, they've got the chops, they've got the experience, and they love what they do. These are some of the happiest people in the world because they get to work with all of you who are doing some amazing things with products and technology. So I'll hand it back to Nick to see if we have any questions today. But thank you so much for you know, participating in this session and the entire True Quality virtual summit. If you ever have any questions, you can email me directly. My email is on screen, and I guess we'll open it up for questions.
Insightful presentation.
Like we might be having some technical difficulties, so let me.
Are you not able to hear me, John?
I do now, yes.
All righty. Saying thank you. That's very, very insightful presentation. Appreciate you letting us all know how to implement and maintain an audit-ready QMS and giving us an overview of the Greenlight Guru platform. We do have quite a few questions, so we'll jump right into it. First off, we have a question, don't have the name, but how do you practically implement risk-based thinking into every process while implementing ISO 1345?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a decision-making process, to be quite frank. And you know, I think the curveball that was thrown when this notion was introduced in 1345 might have just been the phrasing and terminology. In practice, though, I mean, there are some processes that sort of lend themselves already to being a risk-based approach. We may not have called it a risk-based approach. So like complaint handling or customer feedback. I mean, typically a company will have a decision tree, like, okay, was there an adverse event? And I'm oversimplifying this for the sake of this answer. But you know, the first thing I'm trying to figure out when I get feedback is, was there an adverse event involved? Yes or no? Okay, no. Then, okay, is this a complaint? Yes or no? So I go through these series of decisions, but you know, that sort of methodology is a risk-based approach. I think some other examples are like if I get materials from suppliers and I do an incoming inspection on those materials, and I find that some of those things that I got were out of spec, they're non-conforming. What do I do with it? Do I scrap it? Do I rework it? Do I send it back to supplier? We may not have called that a risk-based approach, but that is a risk-based approach where we're making a decision, thinking about the upstream and downstream ramifications. And I think it's, there are some areas where we've done this already historically as businesses, but there might be some other areas where we didn't do that so much. And so I think the whole idea of being risk-based approach is to think about, the happy path is always simple and easy to think about, but what happens if there's something that's a curveball or deviation or something like that we need to think about our risk-based approach. What do we do in those scenarios? How do we handle it? Do we just keep pushing it, or do we kick it back, or what do we do? So I know that's a very general response, but for the person who asked the question, you can reach out to me directly and we can have a more specific chat if that'd be helpful.
Thank you, John. And we're going to stay on the risk topic for just a second here, and I'm going to combine two questions into one. The first one asks, can you discuss how risk is handled in the QMS how risks are handled within the QMS are addressed in Greenlight Guru? Is there a risk-specific module in Greenlight Guru? And then one that I think you'll have fun answering. My company is considering an Fmea model for every single process within the QMS. Please convince me that this is not the intent or necessary. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to answer this separately. First question, so how does Greenlight address risk-based approach? So we do have a product-specific 14971 aligned workflow that's within our Go side of things that is completely integrated with design and development. But for all the other processes, there's a risk-based methodology or rubric that's included in that process too. So like, for example, when you go through a CAPA workflow, there's an area that incorporates risk as part of your decision-making process, and that's pervasive throughout all the other workflows. So it's built into the workflows for those respective areas. And then the second question, FMEA has there is a time and place for doing this, but let's break down what FMEA stands for and a little bit of what it means. Failure mode effects analysis. So for an FMEA approach to be valid, you have to assume that there is a failure mode, number one. The other thing about that tool is that it is a bottom-up approach, and it implies that there is a single fault failure. Again, there are times to use this, but if you're using this as your approach to assessing and evaluating risk, you can't do it very easily on the front end from a product perspective. You almost have to wait until you know at least a preliminary bill of materials of your product. So you have to be pretty granular at that point, and that's mid to later stream in the product development process. It applies that there's a failure mode, something had to go wrong, and that it's the single condition that led to that failure. That's what a FMEA is. Again, there's a point in time where that can be useful, but you need to bring up your approach to risk, and it's very complicated and convoluted. And I've spent days literally in FMEA working sessions on a single device that ends up being an Excel file that's thousands and thousands of line items that nobody uses. We checked a box, and I wish I had that time back, to be quite honest. But the methodology that I would encourage you to consider is more of a top-down approach, at least initially. Understand the hazards that are involved, and I want to key on a couple things. We're making medical devices. You can use your medical device exactly the way it is intended, exactly according to the instructions for use and labeling and so on and so forth, and you still have risk, because I said this yesterday, but it's worth repeating. Think about a needle, just a vascular needle. It's a sharp device. If you stick it in a patient's vein or artery, there is risk there. I mean, number one, that patient's going to say "ow" if they're conscious, right? That's a risk. You're using it exactly the way it was supposed to. There's no failure modes. So risk needs to be more holistic. It needs to incorporate the actual use of that product, the intended use of that product, and it needs to be broader than just failure modes. And if you think about most risk situations, there were a sequence of events that had a chain of events that had to happen in order for the hazardous situation to manifest. So this is where a more holistic top-down approach, at least initially, and there might be times where you get into this and you determine, we need to do a thorough root cause investigation, or and dive in deeper on this part, this piece. And that might be a case where Fmea could add value rather than looking at, trying to boil the ocean with Fmea. So I hope that helps give a little bit of context.
Yeah, absolutely. John, thank you. Sorry, I got one last question here. I know we're at the top of the hour, or top of the presentation. Ben asks, how does Greenlight Guru capture the design outputs of agile development to show design history? Do you think it's necessary from the perspective of an auditor to capture design history during the rapid iteration of agile development?
There's a couple questions in there. So how does Greenlight show that? So the way Greenlight shows that, the design outputs from an agile methodology, we've built it super flexible. I mean, it sounds a little cheeky, I know, but think of Greenlight as providing guardrails. So the principal artifact that gets generated is a traceability matrix that shows the flow from user needs all the way through inputs, outputs, and verification and validation. But the way we've architected the system is we have a couple things. One we call multi-level design controls. So if you have a device that has any complicated components or interactions whatsoever, you can break these down item by item or component by component. And then you can manage the workflow of each of those things. The classic example would be like an electromechanical device. And I have hardware, like the printed circuit boards, and I have software, firmware, what have you. Oftentimes, the hardware is being designed and developed by one group of engineers and the software by a different group. Now, at some point, these things need to blend and merge together. But the hardware and the software are going to go at different rates during the product development process. So we've built the system to accommodate how work gets done within a business, and we've incorporated a designer view that's super agile and super flexible, so that you can pick and choose. If I just want to do a design review on the hardware, I could do that, or if I want to just do the software, I could do that, or if I want the whole product, it's super flexible from that regard. Nick, what was the second part of the question?
And then the second part was, do you think it's necessary from the perspective of an auditor to capture design history during the rapid iteration of agile development?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, there's no black or white answer there. I think it depends on what the change is, and I think it depends on the state of whether or not that particular impacted design control item was, I'll say, approved. So if you already had something like, I'll pick an example, like if you had a requirement that has already been reviewed and approved, and you have a record of that, and then you start to build prototypes, and you're like, oh crap, we got to go change that requirement. If you go back and change it, yes, there is an expectation that there's a record of that change, a review of that change, its upstream and downstream ramifications. But if that, so yes, on that example, but if that requirement was still being worked out and we hadn't finalized it yet, and we built a prototype to help us refine that requirement, and then we go back in, not necessarily, but it's a little complicated. Again, if you have some specific details, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to chat with you.
All righty, John. Thank you so much for this presentation. Really appreciate it, everybody. Jon Speer, VP of QA, RA, and founder at Greenlight Guru. Thank you for joining. We got our next session starting in 5 minutes on the economic operators under the new EU MDR, and we hope to see you there. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.